Hey guys, Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC, BHSpringSolutions.com, back again for another session of High Power University. This session is going to focus on trigger pulls, and I brought a few members of the family here today for the session and as demonstrators, and we're going to start with a premise. The idea of a good quality trigger pull is to not pull your sights off of the target. And to the degree that a trigger can not pull your sights off the target, we deem that to be better or superior. Assuming that accuracy in your firearm is an important thing, and we believe universally that is. You're responsible for every bullet that leaves the end of the muzzle of your firearm, therefore the accuracy is important for that reason and many other reasons. I have put together an analysis of trigger pulls by model. This is something we're going to make available at High Power University and within the text of High Power University. But this is going to give you an example, and it's also going to demonstrate how high John Browning set the bar on some things. What we've done here is we've taken some popular models of handguns, some of the world's most popular models of handguns, and we're comparing trigger pulls, both the distance and the quality of the trigger pull in terms of, is this trigger pull a straight back trigger pull? Is it not a straight back trigger pull? We're going to give you some examples of that. And the first one we're going to start out with showing you is a typical 1911. And we measured the distance of the trigger travel in terms of the total distance that the trigger travels during the complete trigger pull and then the forward reset. We measured that at 3 millimeters, and all of these firearms have been checked and all of them are clear of ammunition. And I want you to notice the total amount of trigger travel here, and that the trigger pull is straight back, and it totals 3 millimeters. That's entirely a John Browning design, as we understand. The next model would encompass the 1910, 1922, and 1955, all very, very similar models. They all use a very similar, identical kind of a trigger system, and it's this one. And we're going to show you here, we deemed this one, as far as the straight back component of the trigger pull, it really isn't. And you're going to watch the bottom of my finger here. And you might have noticed that it definitively goes down and back. That was 1910, and we see that by 1911, Mr. Browning had really corrected that in the 1911. Now it's a very straight back, pure kind of a trigger pull. Both of them 3 millimeters. Now, John Browning also developed this 22 target pistol, and we'll take a quick look at it. 2.2 millimeters, and that is the total trigger travel that you experience with this particular model. Here's the total reset, and yeah, it's 2.2 millimeters. This is how high John Browning set the bar. We would make the argument that nobody's jumped over this bar yet today. He set the bar so high that over 100 years later, it's still confounding, designers and frankly computers, how he did what he did when he did it. Because now we're going to take a look at some of today's very popular pistols, the Glock pistol, as an example. You see there on the chart, distance of trigger travel, 12 millimeters. But is it a straight back trigger pull? We would say yes. We're going to go ahead and show you with our TSSG equipped Glock here, but you're going to see the distance of the trigger travel of my finger. And yes, watch the reset. Yep, it appears to be pretty straight back. That would explain why people do generally shoot a Glock pistol quite accurately, is it really is. It's not because Gaston got it so wonderfully great in terms of the distance of the trigger pull necessarily, but the quality of the trigger pull is arguably very straight back. It's ergonomically quality in terms of the straight back component of the trigger pull, and but it's long. 4 times longer than a 1911's trigger pull. I think that probably explains why today you see one case at the gun store that's got all Glocks in it, and another case that's got all 1911s in it. The 1911 trigger pull is just a formidable kind of a thing to compete against in terms of affirmative favor with the shooter. Okay, we got the CZ75. Let's take a quick look at it. We got 2 modes in the CZ75, 2 distinctly different trigger pulls. The CZ75 single action trigger pull here, and the reset, and I think the reset really shows you, yeah, that's pretty pure, that's pretty straight back. It's also 13.5 millimeters, and then the double action side of it, but take a look, it's still, František Kowalski, I believe, is the name of the designer of the CZ75, and I may not have pronounced that correctly. My best translator is Bulgarian, and that's in the neighborhood of Czechoslovakia, but not quite the same dialect. Anyway, he did have some good understanding of geometry. I would say that even the double action trigger pull, does not have a big down and back component to it, but it's 25 millimeters, and man, that's a lot of trigger travel and a lot of pull and a lot of force you have to put on the trigger. And either way, quite frankly, I mean, a 13.5 millimeter trigger travel and reset that's a lot. Okay, we're going to run to the high power now, and let's see how the high power compares. We're going to review. We had the 1911 at 3 millimeters, John Browning's earlier design at 3, not a down and back, or it is more of a down and back than a straight back. His target pistol that was unconscious. The Glock pistol, one of the world's most popular law enforcement and sometimes military and civilian handguns, has a whopping 12 millimeters amount of trigger travel, but it is straight back. CZ75, astoundingly, even longer kind of trigger travels than the other ones we've just looked at. Okay, let's take a look at the Browning High Power. The OEM trigger of the Browning High Power, we have an example, unaltered from the factory, never fired before example, a high power practical. Browning did a good job, or FN did a good job for Browning on the practical models. They still had the magazine disconnect, so you hear this ratty trigger, but other than that, I mean, these were good pistols. You see the traditional, we call down and back trigger motion of the high powers trigger. You really see that when you see the full motion and the reset, and my finger rise higher than we just saw it at the full rearward pull position. That's 8.2 millimeters total trigger travel that we measured of a high power original or traditional trigger subassembly. And it is what it is. It's definitely less trigger travel than a Glock, definitely less trigger travel than a CZ75, but it doesn't get in quite the same area as a high power pistol. And I want to talk about real quickly the high power with the new BHSpringSolutions advanced trigger for high powers. And we got a couple different generations here. We've got a Mark III. This does contain the drop safety sear lever. And then we've got a Mark II model that does contain the Type 1 sear lever. And both of these we've fitted to these handguns. And what we mean by fitted is the BHSpringSolutions advanced trigger subassembly for high power includes trigger, redesigned trigger lever, redesigned trigger return spring, a magazine eject assist spring, and the trigger lever is purposely made longer than is going to be impossible for you to even install your slide on typically, and it requires fitting. Now, what that fitting does to each handgun is, regardless if you have a newer generation high power, an FN, a Browning, or another clone, or an older generation high power, with either kind of sear lever, you're going to be able to get the same kind of reduction in total trigger travel, and it's going to be a more pure, straight back kind of a trigger pull. And in the case of this particular high power, it came with the same trigger subassembly as the practical model we just saw, but when we fitted the new BHSpringSolutions advanced trigger subassembly to this high power, it reduced the total trigger travel to about 6 millimeters, down from 8.2 to about 6. And we're saying that what's possible with the high power design, in order for it to function properly, to not go into full auto mode of at any point, the minimal amount of allowable trigger travel for the design, and we're talking about how much you have to move the sear lever in order to activate the sear, to clear the hammer tooth, to let the hammer drive home to the firing pin. It is between 6.0 and 6.3 millimeters of cumulative trigger travel. Cumulative trigger travel means the amount of trigger travel you get with take up, break, and any trigger travel that happens after the slide cycles. And this is the trigger travel right here that we're talking about. And on this particular high power that we fitted this advanced high power trigger to, it's right at about 6.1 millimeters. And this is an older generation high power, and it too measured right at about 6.2 millimeters. So this really is, this trigger subassembly, first of all, it's a reduction of about 25 to 30% in total distance of trigger travel compared to the high power's original trigger subassembly. But that's only because of the necessity that it needs to be fitted to each model. That's the only way to get to that kind of a number with the high power design. Now, for me, myself, and I, definitely compared to a Glock pistol, compared to a CZ75 pistol, there is a very comfortable thing for me in the fact that I've got a very nice smooth take up. I've got a definitive, what I call, wall here. This one is tuned to about a 5.5 pound trigger pull, which is exactly where I want it, because this is my carry high power every day. And for me, this is just perfect, and it is this very pure straight back kind of a trigger pull. But this is the way that BHSpringSolutions, in conjunction with RDIH, has, we believe, optimized the trigger for the high power pistol by making it a requirement that it needs to be fitted to each handgun. This allows you to achieve the minimum total cumulative trigger travel in the trigger and the reset on your high power in order to truly optimize the design. All right, thanks for watching this this presentation of High Power University, BHSpringSolutions, bhspringsolutions.com. I'm Mark Allen.